Welcome to Positive Voices. Please like this video and subscribe Positive Voices. Let's begin. December in the city has a way of sharpening everything: the air, the lights, the sounds. That evening, as the wind held outside, I stood by the window of our suburban home, watching snowflakes dance under the glow of street lights. Inside, the warmth of Christmas lights and the laughter of party guests filled the space. Elise, my wife, had outdone herself again. The annual holiday party was her masterpiece, a culmination of weeks of planning. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, her emerald green dress catching the light just right, her blonde hair framing her face like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Watching her, I felt a mix of pride and unease. She was magnetic, drawing people to her with a charm that seemed effortless. But tonight, something felt different. I sipped my bourbon, pretending to listen to a colleague talk about their ski trip while my eyes kept drifting toward Elise. She was laughing, as usual, her smile radiant, but it lingered a little too long in one direction. Toward Nolan. Nolan was her boss, recently promoted, and apparently the new center of her admiration. I'd heard his name more than I cared to in recent months. Now watching them, I couldn't ignore the way her attention seemed glued to him, or the way he looked at her, confident, smug, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was overthinking things. Elise was a people person, charming, social, the kind of host who thrived in a crowd. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, and Nolan was just another guest. Or so I tried to convince myself, but as the evening wore on, my attempts to rationalize what I was seeing became harder to maintain. Each time I glanced over, Elise and Nolan seemed closer. Their conversations more engrossed. Her laughter was louder, her smiles brighter, and his gaze, steady, unwavering, and far too familiar, set my teeth on edge. At one point, I caught them standing by the Christmas tree, their heads tilted toward each other as if the rest of the party didn't exist. Nolan leaned in, saying something that made Elise laugh, her hand brushing his arm. The gesture was subtle, but it sent a pang of anger coursing through me. I took another sip of my bourbon, the burn doing little to calm my nerves. "Stop it," I muttered to myself. "You're imagining things," but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Eventually, I decided I needed to see for myself. When Elise excused herself to the kitchen, carrying an empty tray, I followed, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and dread. When I walked in, I stopped dead in my tracks. There they were, Elise leaning against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand, and Nolan standing far too close. Their conversation was low, their postures relaxed in a way that felt too intimate. They didn't notice me at first, and for a brief moment, I just stood there watching. Elise was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the polite smile she gave me when I asked about her day, but something softer, warmer. The kind of smile that used to be reserved for me. I cleared my throat, breaking the moment. They both turned. Elise's expression faltering for a split second before she recovered. "Hey Victor," Nolan said, his tone infuriatingly casual. "Your wife was just telling me about your trip to Napa. Sounds like a great time." "It was," I replied shortly, my gaze fixed on Elise. "Elise, we should get back to the party." She hesitated, glancing at Nolan before nodding. "Of course," she said, her tone cheerful but forced. "I'll be right there." I didn't wait for her. Back in the living room, the festive atmosphere felt suffocating. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses grated on my nerves. I tried to distract myself by talking to a few guests, but my mind kept replaying the scene in the kitchen. The way Nolan had stood so close. The way Elise had smiled at him. The way she had hesitated before following me. By the time the last guest left, just after midnight, I was on edge. Elise moved through the room, thanking everyone with her usual grace, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. When the house finally fell silent, she disappeared into the kitchen to tidy up. I followed her, my heart pounding. "Elise," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "What's going on with you and Nolan?" I asked bluntly. The question lingered in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and threatening. Elise froze for a moment. her hand tightening around the glass she was rinsing in the sink. Slowly, she set it down and turned off the water. When she finally turned to face me, her expression was calm. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or irritation. "Victor, don't do this," she said softly. "I'm not doing anything," I replied, my voice firm. "I'm just asking a question. What's going on with you and Nolan?" She crossed her arms, leaning back against the counter. "We work together. That's all. That's all." I repeated, my tone sharp. Because it sure didn't look like just work when you were leaning into him and laughing like he was the funniest man alive. Her jaw tightened. "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I countered. "Because I saw the way he looked at you. And the way you looked at him." Her calm facade cracked for a moment. Her eyes narrowing. "He's my boss, Victor. We have to work closely together. That's all there is to it." I took a step closer, refusing to let her dismiss me. And why didn't it look like that? Why did it feel like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see? For a moment, she didn't answer. She just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then with a sigh she turned away, reaching for the wine bottle on the counter. "Victor," she said as she poured herself a glass. "I'm tired. Can we not do this tonight?" "No," I said firmly. "We're doing this now. I need to know what's going on." She froze mid-pour, her back to me. The room was so silent, I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, she set the bottle down and turned around. Her shoulders slumped. "No one asked me to go away with him," she admitted quietly. The words hit me like a freight train. My chest tightened. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He asked me to spend a weekend with him," she repeated, her tone quieter now. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "And what did you say?" She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't say anything. I haven't decided." "You haven't decided?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Are you kidding me? You're actually standing here, telling me you're considering going away with him. It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice trembling. I feel trapped, Victor. Our life. It's become so predictable. I need it. I don't know. I needed space." "Space." I shot back, my anger boiling over. "So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you let him swoop in and offer you an escape." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. "Victor, I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You did." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying our conversation over and over, dissecting every word. How had we gotten here? What had gone so wrong? The woman lying beside me felt like a stranger, and the trust I'd taken for granted was shattered. By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I'd made a decision. If Elise wanted space, I'd give it to her, more than she'd bargained for. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. Downstairs, the remnants of last night's party were still scattered around the living room. A half-empty wine bottle, crumpled napkins, and abandoned gift bag. It all felt like a mockery of the life we'd built together. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. Over the years, we'd saved diligently, enough for vacations, home renovations, and a comfortable cushion for the future. Without hesitation, I transferred the majority of it into a separate account under my name, leaving just enough to keep the account active. Next, I drafted an email to a divorce attorney a friend had recommended months ago during an offhand conversation. At the time, it had seemed unnecessary. Now, it felt like the only logical step. With the bank account handled and the email to the divorce attorney sent, I began combing through the house. The memories that once brought me joy, photos from vacations, anniversary cards, little keepsakes from our early days, fell hollow now. They were remnants of a life I no longer recognized. A life Elise had dismantled piece by piece. I packed everything that held sentimental value into a box. Our wedding album, the framed photo from our honeymoon in Santorini, even the anniversary letters we'd written each other. They all went into the box and were stacked by the front door. Each item I packed felt like another brick in a wall I was building between the past and the future. I wasn't sure if I'd ever want to open that box again, but for now, it needed to be out of sight. Her phone sat charging on the kitchen counter. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to cross that line. But the image of Elise and Nolan, standing too close in the kitchen, played in my mind like a broken record. My stomach churned as I picked up the phone and entered the passcode. I told myself I had the right to know. I deserved the truth. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her messages with Nolan were damning. They weren't just work-related. They were intimate, filled with flirtation and longing. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again. You're incredible, Elise. I've never felt like this before. We need to talk soon. I miss you." Each message was like a dagger to the heart. I took screenshots of everything, emailing them to myself as evidence. Then I checked her social media accounts, finding even more proof in the form of private messages and likes on photos I hadn't even known existed. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking and my chest felt tight with anger. The final touch was the dining room table. I printed the messages I had found, highlighting the most incriminating ones. The divorce papers, already signed on my end, went on top of the stack. Elise's wedding ring, which she had taken off the night before to wash dishes, sat neatly beside them. When Elise finally came downstairs, she froze at the sight of the boxes and the stack of papers on the table. "Victor," she said, her voice laced with confusion. "What is all this?" I leaned against the counter, my expression unreadable. "It's exactly what it looks like." Her eyes darted to the dining table, where the papers and evidence waited. Slowly, she walked over, picking up the stack. Her face paled as she flipped through the printed messages. "Victor, I can explain." "Don't." I interrupted, my voice cold. "I'm done, Elise. You wanted space? Now you've got it." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. "I never." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "I saw the messages. I saw the way you looked at him. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't mean anything." Her tears spilled over as she tried to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Pack your things and go," I said firmly. "The papers are signed. This is over." "Victor, please," she sobbed. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, the finality of the moment washing over me. "You already made your choice, Elise. Now live with it." When she left, the silence was deafening. For the first time in years, the house was empty. No laughter. No soft hum of her favorite music. Just the low buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering lights of the Christmas tree, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I poured myself a drink, the burn of the whiskey grounding me as I tried to process everything. Elise was gone, and so was the life we had built together. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days following Elise's departure were a blur. The silence in the house was deafening. A constant reminder of the life we had shared and the betrayal that had shattered it. I spent most of my time cleaning, not because it needed it, but because the physical act of scrubbing, organizing, and discarding gave me something to focus on. It was as if erasing her presence from the house might somehow ease the ache in my chest. I boxed up the last of her things, clothes, shoes, and the little knickknacks she had collected over the years, and left them by the front door. She'd asked for time to figure out where to go, but I made it clear she couldn't stay here. This wasn't her home anymore. Her text started coming in that evening. "Victor, please. Can we just talk? I messed up. I know that. But we can work through this. Don't throw away what we built. We're worth fighting for." Each message made my chest tighten, a mix of anger and sadness churning in my gut. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. By the end of the week, the divorce process was underway. My attorney had reviewed the evidence I provided, screenshots of her messages with Nolan, photos from her social media, and a written account of the events leading up to our separation. "This is solid," he said. "You're in a strong position here." It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. At least I wouldn't have to fight to protect what was mine. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and working late into the night. The distraction was welcome, but it didn't fill the void. The house still felt too big, too quiet. The memories of Elise lingered in every room, and no amount of cleaning or rearranging could erase them. One evening, while flipping through an old photo album, I found a picture from our first Christmas together. We were sitting by the tree, wrapped in matching sweaters, our smiles bright and unguarded. I stared at the photo for a long time before closing the album and sliding it into a box with the rest of the keepsakes. That chapter of my life was over. A few weeks later, I received an email from Sarah, Nolan's wife. The subject line read, "Thank you." I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. "Victor, thank you for telling me the truth. I'd suspected something for a while, but I didn't have proof until now. I'm sorry for what you're going through, but I'm grateful you reached out. I've already taken steps to handle this on my end. Take care, Sarah." A grim sense of satisfaction settled over me as I read her words. Nolan's betrayal hadn't just destroyed my life. It had unraveled his too. At least now, he would have to face the consequences of his actions. Word of Nolan's affair spread quickly within his company. Sarah had filed for divorce, and HR had gotten involved after she shared evidence of his inappropriate behavior. By mid-January, he was forced to resign. It wasn't revenge exactly, but knowing he wasn't getting away unscathed brought a small sense of justice. Elise, on the other hand, was floundering. She continued to text and call. Her message is oscillating between desperate apologies and bitter accusations. One day she'd beg me to forgive her. The next she'd lash out, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. I ignored them all. Engaging with her would only drag me back into a mess I was trying to leave behind. Over time, the ache in my chest began to fade. I developed a new routine, filling my days with work, exercise, and small personal projects. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned over the years, like woodworking and photography. Slowly but surely, I started to rediscover myself. One weekend, while wandering through a local park with my camera, I stumbled upon a community event. People were gathered around booths and displays, chatting and laughing. Their energy infectious. I struck up a conversation with one of the organizers, a woman named Lily, who was setting up a table for an upcoming photography hike. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and by the end of our conversation, I'd signed up to join. The photography hike turned out to be exactly what I needed, surrounded by nature and creative minds. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Lily and I ended up walking together for most of the hike, our conversation flowing easily. She was funny, kind, and passionate about her work. A freelance graphic designer with an eye for detail and a love of adventure. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch, meeting for coffee and sharing our work. Our connection was easy and unforced, and for the first time since Elise's betrayal, I felt a spark of hope. As the weeks passed, Lily became a regular part of my life. What started as casual coffee meetups turned into long conversations about everything and nothing. We explored the city together, photographing hidden murals, quaint street corners, and quiet parks. Her laughter was infectious, and her perspective on life was refreshing. For the first time in months, I felt like I was living again, not just surviving. One evening, as we sat at a local cafe editing photos, Lily looked up from her laptop and smiled. "You're really talented, you know that? These shots, they tell a story." Her words caught me off guard. "Thanks," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I haven't felt this inspired in years." "Maybe because you're finally doing it for yourself," she said simply. That comment stayed with me long after we parted ways that night. One afternoon, while running errands downtown, I saw someone I hadn't expected to see, Elise. She was standing on the sidewalk, looking at her phone, her expression tense. For a moment, I froze, debating whether to approach her or walk away. She looked up and our eyes met. There was no avoiding it now. Victor, she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something else. Regret, maybe. Elise, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. How have you been? Good, I said simply. How about you? She let out a soft sigh, her gaze dropping to the ground. I've been better, she admitted. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything, I nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger I had carried for so long. But another part of me, the part that had picked up the pieces of our life alone, wasn't ready to let her off so easily. I appreciate that, I said finally. But it doesn't change anything. Her eyes filled with tears. And she nodded. I know, I hope you're happy. I am, I said firmly. And for the first time, I realized it was true. Over time, my relationship with Lily deepened. She encouraged me to submit my photos to a local gallery. And to my surprise, they accepted several pieces for an upcoming exhibit. On the night of the opening, as I stood in the gallery, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and strangers admiring my work, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. Lily was there, of course, her support unwavering. This is just the beginning, she said, her eyes shining with excitement. She was right. That night marked a turning point, not just in my career but in my life. I had found a new passion, a new purpose, and a new connection that felt real and grounded. Elise's texts and calls became less frequent over time, eventually stopping altogether. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved to a new city, trying to start over. I wished her well, silently hoping she found whatever it was she had been searching for. But I didn't dwell on her anymore. She was part of my past, and my future was unfolding in front of me. Nolan's life, on the other hand, continued to unravel. Word of his affair and subsequent resignation had spread through his professional network, leaving him blacklisted from several major firms. It was a fitting consequence for someone who had built his success on charm and manipulation. By the time the next holiday season arrived, my life looked completely different. My apartment, once sparsely furnished and impersonal, had become a cozy sanctuary filled with art, books, and photos from my adventures with Lily. Together, we had created a life that felt authentic and joyful. On Christmas Eve, as we sat by the fire, her hand resting lightly on mine, I couldn't help but smile. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a sense of hope and gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Do you ever think about how far you've come? Lily asked softly. All the time, I replied, squeezing her hand gently. For the first time in years, I wasn't just looking back. I was looking forward, and the view was beautiful. The months that followed the gallery opening solidified everything I had worked so hard to rebuild. My photography gained more recognition, leading to new opportunities with local publications and community projects. Lily was always there, cheering me on and celebrating every small victory, as though it were her own. Her unwavering support was something I hadn't realized I needed until it was there, steady and reliable. We took spontaneous weekend trips, combining her love for writing and my photography to document our adventures. Each journey felt like a step further away from the past, and closer to a future I was excited to embrace. One evening, as I was sorting through photos from our latest trip, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello, I answered. Victor, it's Sarah. Her voice was steady, but carried a hint of hesitation. Sarah, I asked, surprise. It's been a while. How are you? I'm okay, she said. I just wanted to thank you again. For everything, telling me the truth about Nolan. It gave me the push I needed to take control of my life. Her words stirred something in me. A mix of gratitude and relief. I'm glad to hear that, I said. You deserve better. I think we both do, she replied. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. I hope things are going well for you. They are, I said honestly. Thanks for checking in. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, reflecting on how far I had come. The pain of the past had once felt insurmountable, but now it was a distant memory. A chapter 1 had closed. When the anniversary of Elise's departure arrived, I didn't mark it with bitterness or sadness. Instead, Lily and I spent the day hiking a nearby trail, capturing the vibrant colors of autumn with our cameras. At the summit, we sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I'm proud of you," Lily said, her voice soft but sure. "For what?" I asked, glancing at her. "For everything," she replied. "For moving forward, for letting go, for building something new." Her words warmed me in a way I couldn't fully explain. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "You could have," she said with a smile. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." The next Christmas felt like a rebirth. My apartment, once a cold and empty space, was now filled with warmth and laughter. Lily and I decorated a tree together, stringing lights and hanging ornaments while holiday music played in the background. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. And for the first time in years, I felt at home. As we sat by the fire that evening, sipping mulled wine and reflecting on the past year, I realized how much I had grown. The pain and betrayal that once consumed me had become a distant memory, a reminder of the resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder, her presence grounding me. "What do you think next year will bring?" she asked. "Whatever it is," I said, "I know I'll be ready for it. And I'm in it." For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The road ahead was wide open, and I couldn't wait to see where it led.